Welcome everyone to Celtic Junction. I'm delighted to welcome you all this evening for another one of our seminars. I'm Elizabeth Stack. I'm the new Education Director here, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you that the Celtic Junction Arts Centre is delighted to celebrate, promote and preserve cultural arts and community. So the talk tonight is part of an outreach that we do where we mingle some of our different departments. We have the Owen McKiernan Library, as you know. We have a very famous and robust concert series. We do, of course, Irish Outreach Coalition with Irish dance and music and language. And then we have the Celtic Junction classes, our education department. So tonight we're going to be talking with Dr. Ed Sellner, who will be speaking to us about Celtic spirituality, the ancient origins and history that arose from the various countries, Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales, Brittany, the Isle of Man, and Spain. Qualities associated with it are the Celts' mystical connection with nature, their appreciation of women's leadership and gifts, their sensitivity for the marginalized and marginalized places in their lives, recognition of the wisdom of visions and dreams, their love of beauty in all forms, and their valuing of eros and of storytelling. And of course, in today's world, we probably need more and more of that. Dr. Ed Sellner, just to tell you about him, received his doctorate in theology and spirituality from the University of Notre Dame. He was a professor at St. Catherine's University for 35 years and is the author of about 19 books, he told me. He's got another one coming out. Among them, Wisdom of the Celtic Saints, the Celtic Soul Friend, and Soul Making the Telling of a Spiritual Journey, with the most recently published one was Celtic Saints and Their Animal Friends. He studied the significance of dreams and visions at the Jung Institute in Zurich in Switzerland, and he is also a fellow at the Institute of Animal Ethics in Oxford, England. So we're delighted to welcome Dr. Sellner. He's going to present for about 40 minutes, and I welcome all of you, if you have questions or comments, to use the chat feature down here or the Q&A, and after Dr. Sellner's presentation, I'll pop in and moderate the talk. So welcome everyone, and welcome Dr. Sellner. We're so happy to have you here tonight.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here at Celtic Junction. I've been associated with it in taking advantage of their many different programs, from music to dance to lectures, etc. It really is a pleasure to go back to this Celtic spirituality. It's so much a part of my life. I was telling Elizabeth that I wasn't raised with any kind of awareness or discussion about having Irish roots or whatever. And it was only knowing John Kennedy when he went to Ireland, that opened it all up to me. And then when I was reading Thomas Merton, one of my key spiritual influences in my life, he introduced me to Celtic spirituality and the stories and all that. So there was some of this growing awareness, but then after that, I wanted to visit Ireland. And I since then, oh my God, in the last 35 years of teaching and everything, I think I've been there about 25 times. I've taken students there, I've taken family there, I've taken groups there, and I've gone on my own. It's just been, for me, the discovery of my soul. I'm German Irish, and more German than Irish, and my biggest influence, though, is my Irish grandmother. And I tell people, well, I may not be all that Irish by comparison with German, but I do have an Irish soul, I think. And it's really reflected in my research and everything. I wanted to go back to a dream. Elizabeth mentioned I studied Jungian psychology at Zurich, and I'm on the animal ethics in Oxford. Those are two dimensions that I think really fit in with the kind of Celtic heritage we have. The Celts are known for their kind of mystical experiences and their real awareness of the value of dreams. And, as I say in my latest book, the animal world was so close to these Celts, and they had such a recognition of its value. I know when I first went over to the rock of, what is it? The
Tara
large rock.
Or Cashel?
Yeah, Cashel. I went into the kind of the church section, And there were all these different figures, human figures, but intertwined with them were, human heads and animal heads. And I thought, well, what is that about? I mean, it was really strange. I'd never seen that before. But now as I've studied more and more of the Celts and their kinship with animals, well, it makes all the sense in the world that they valued animals as much as they valued humans. And thus they made that distinction in their art and in even their churches. But I wanted to tonight, there's so much to cover. I'll try to be brief, but the biggest thing for me is that we start off with the term Celts, the Celts. It's not the Celtics, they're a basketball team, but the Celts really are made up of all sorts of different types. There's Irish, of course, but there's the Welsh, there's the Manx, there's the Irish on the northwest side of Spain, there's Brittany, Scotland, all these wonderful places that I have visited on my different travels and pilgrimages. But they weren't all that well known until recently. This century, brief as it is at this point, but also within the last century, there's much more archaeological studies being done. And this whole awareness of the Celts and the different places they were and what they produced and the art and everything, that's really much more recent. But the reason was that the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans, they wrote everything down. And so we have all these books. Fantastic heritage, yes. I mean, the Celts and the Celtic monasteries kept that heritage alive. But the Celts didn't write things down. They were in oral traditions. They told stories. They knew stories feed the soul as the food feeds the body. And thus, what we, again, more recently are discovering all these wonderful things about the Celts that I want to allude to somewhat. They were also, the Picts were called the painted people. And I discovered tattoos when I was much younger, and I felt that was part of my tradition too. My younger son, who's very much into tattoos and loves the Irish and everything, my older son, not so much. And his comments to me when I got some tattoos were that, what is that about? I said, it's Celtic body art. It's a form of art. But anyway, I'm not here to advocate you get more tattoos, but it is part of this Celtic tradition. The Celts were Indo-Europeans, originated, in fact, what we discovered is they originated near India. And I was privileged to go to India. It was two years ago now, to India and Sri Lanka. I was doing my latest book on Thomas Merton and his visits there. But I got to know them firsthand, the Indian people. There's a similarity between the Celts and them in music and art, numbers, language, attitudes towards sexuality. They're known for their eroticism, their devotion to the lingam, the male phallus. And God knows, every place I visited, every temple, the lingam was there in India, but also they're all over, much larger ones. The hill of Tara, for example. I think they baptized it when the Christians came and said it was really St. Patrick. But no, it's a lingam. It's a large devotion to male sexuality. And I would hope we also begin to appreciate much more the feminine as well. There's also the Indian word akara, which refers to the spiritual guide. And the Celts have anamkara, friend of the soul. And that's what I spent a lot of time researching about and writing. And that's the kind of work that I do in my retirement, is spiritual guidance. The early Celts, though, what were some of the characteristics associated with them? Individuation, hard to unite. I mean, a tremendous appreciation and valuing of the tribes and kinship and all, but they weren't known especially for getting along. And it's one of the things that, again, the Roman writers clue us into. They were prone to drunkenness. I know this comes as a surprise to you if you haven't been associated with St. Patrick's Day, but most people have, whether they're Irish or not. And the ancient Romans thought they drank a lot and were known for that. The respect for poets, learning, I mentioned stories, respect for women. Women, to a tremendous degree compared to the Romans, had a tremendous effect or valuing of women. I mean, the stories, the mythological stories, it's not only the great kings, but it's also the great queens. It's not only the druids, but it's also the druidesses. It's not only the warriors, but also the women that were involved as that. Celts were devotion to family life, the tribal tradition, as I said. Nomads, they loved to travel. The Middle Ages, the Christian Celts, and Irish especially, there's all sorts of taking out, I don't know how they got there with boats or whatever, from Ireland to the coast of Europe. And all of these later developments, even the road to Santiago in Spain, all of these were hospices built for the pilgrims because the Celts traveled so much. And that's what I was raised in North Dakota. I tell people that I was so bored that I became a reader. And that was one thing that saved me a great deal. But there was also this kind of unconscious awareness that I wanted to travel. And I don't think it was only the isolation of North Dakota, but it was kind of this inherent draw that then in reading about the Irish and the Celts, there was a sense of, well, that's who I am as well. They named better who I am. Their love of nature. There's animus. When I was studying theology a long time ago, well, there was this kind of things of a Christianity we have, and then there were the animus, and these were really put down as just know-nothings, as it were. Well, the Celts had a tremendous appreciation, the ancient Celts, and I always now in my writings refer to the ancient Celts, not to the pagan Celts, because it's really, from my perspective, a put down on all that they taught the Christians, as well as continue to teach us today, I think, in their own spirituality. But there was this sense of animism, the spirits in springs and wells on the mountaintops. It's beautiful. The appreciation of water and this love of nature. I mean, the Celtic lands are surrounded by water. And in one of my books I wrote is like you can wake up in the morning in Ireland or Wales or whatever, and you feel at home because they always have a similar view out the window. It's the ocean. And that in itself is tremendous beauty. If you've been to Land's End and all these different Celtic places, it's a power of the ocean and the majesty and all. This has also gave rise with the water to these Imram stories, the voyagers that the ancient Celts did. Of course, they're surrounded by water. They wanted to get and see what was on the other side. But also there's these same Imram stories were something that St. Brendan, the navigator, was associated with. Columbus is said to have read about St. Brendan and been inspired to go searching for other lands. All of these are tremendous sorts of, for me, in studying the past, tremendously enriching. I wrote it down, I've used it before, but William Faulkner writes about the past isn't over, it isn't even past. And I think the more we study these ancient traditions, especially for me, the Celtic, is to discover that, as the topic of today, this Celtic spirituality, its qualities and relevance for today, the more I study the past, and that rich heritage, the more I understand the values, many of the values that are emerging today, women's leadership, the arts, all of that, the music, all of that is part of our rich heritage, but it also has tremendous relevance today. In terms of nature, again, the green man, I don't know if you've been aware of that. There's a lot of images of the green man throughout the Celtic lands. This is a figure, a primal figure that really is a connecting of people with nature itself. In terms of, again, of kinship, it had its own symbol, the green man. This appreciation of friendships was very much a part of the Celtic world. And the soul friend I mentioned, the anamkara, someone who, because of our longevity with this person, because of our love, our intimacy, our sense that we can be open with the other without being judged. Nobody's perfect. These soul friends were very much involved in soul making, in preparing others to die. And I gave a retreat to hospice workers in Minnesota and talked to them about the soul friend tradition. But I said this anamkara is really people then doing hospice work, as important as that is. If you've ever been with someone you love that's dying and has as I have with my mother, been enriched by the hospice wisdom. The last thing I'm trying to look at here is their stories. Some of the themes that you find in these ancient Celtic stories is the beauty. Beauty, it's something that, well, I think every tribe, I mean, every race is drawn to beauty, but Celts, I may be prejudiced here, but I think Celts have some beautiful, beautiful people, as well as beautiful landscape. All of that is part of the stories that they tell. Friendship, I mentioned. Death. Visions. Dreams. So a friend of mine that died, well, about a year and a half ago. We were very close, and our sons were in the same daycare when they were young. And our friendship goes back. And it's Gordy then that I went to India with. And Gordy Tolbert, who has all of this Celtic appreciation, I'm going to get emotional, but he died suddenly a little bit about a year and a half ago. And it was after his memorial service, I was leading it. I told people I thought that Gordy would be coming to my funeral rather than the other way around. But anyway, within about a month of that, I had a dream. I'm really into dreams, I told you, but I had a dream that someone's knocking at my door, and I go, and it opens, and it's Gordy. and I say, "But you're dead." And he gave me this big bear hug. I could feel it in the frickin' dream. It was very unusual. And then about a month later is another dream. He's knocking at the door. He comes in, he goes in and sits down on a chair he often sat in. And I said, "But you're dead." And he looked at me, "Oh, you doofus." "No, I'm not." Those were tremendous things. And dreams often can be like that. And also the visionary parts. I don't pretend to be a visionary, but, well, a little bit. But it was some years ago, I was writing in my studio, and I walked out and I sat down and I said, I don't know where the hell this came from. I said, "Grandpa, what are you doing here?" Well, I didn't know who it was. But I called my mother. No, she didn't recollect this being a part of that day. Then later I discovered that was the day my great-great-grandfather died, who wrote the books that inspired me to become a writer. And evidently he was there. I wasn't conscious of that, but I became aware of it. So some of these things, they're very much a part of these stories as well as Celtic experiences, I think. The early Celtic church goes back to St. Patrick. I mean, he's one of them. Many Celtic saints I've written about. Patrick, about 452, came to Ireland. He gets a lot of credit, and rightly so, I think. But the sense of this Celtic church that emerged is very much based on its linkage with the earlier ancient Celts and their values and their spirituality and all. There's, for example, the Glorious Oratory in the Dingle Peninsula, goes back to the 6th, 8th centuries. It's a church, ancient church, obviously, but it looks like an upside down boat. It's very distinctive. But of course, it's an early church that would reflect the boats and the travel that the early and ancient people had appreciation of. There was a sense with the churches that were built after Christianity came. The early ones were wood and very much simple, but gradually, as they took on more prominence even, there was this sense that the way they built the churches was there'd be a smaller church and then they'd add on to it. The more congregants there were, and then they'd add on to it. There was a sense of wanting to maintain the unification with the past and not cutting it off, as so much of our society, I think, does. If it's old, like 10 years, well, then we'll get something else new. But it's symbolic, these churches and their structures, of that interconnection between the two, the ancient Celts and the Christian. This early church that arose was different than the Roman churches that developed on the continent of Rome. Of course, Peter and Paul came to Rome, died there, and took on, as Christianity arose there, much of the culture and society and structures of the Roman Empire. The churches became so grand. The men were, in terms of hierarchy, excluded from women. Women were put down in terms of ministry. It's associated with men. Confessors were ordained men. In Ireland and other Celtic lands, there was much more of a church related much more with kinship, with Glendalough and other churches, that their founders were friends, and thus the identity of the churches were related to those earlier relationships. The thin places that becomes a part of Celtic spirituality, the sense that we have a thin veil between this world and the next, and that there's certain experiences we have that may be, at certain sites, revelatory, where suddenly it's like we're looking into the past. Sister Columba of the Sisters of the Love of God in Oxford was the first one to tell me about this phenomenon. And I think now we associate it with certain places. I associate Glendalough, for example, with a thin place. God knows I've had so many different experiences there where I hear the water singing. At the time, I wasn't drinking a lot either. It wasn't that. It was, I could hear them. And there's this real sense of that was a thin place for me. The spirits of the place, the holy wells, even among the early Christians, Celtic Christians, yes, they believed in God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, but their names in terms of the divine were wonderfully related to nature. We're talking about the Lord of the elements, the King of the cloudy sky, the Lord of the starry night. This is where Van Gogh would find a great appreciation, as I do, with that phenomenon and as a holy event. I was in Hawaii some time ago with my family, but we were sitting out at night and looking up in the sky, and there was no clouds. It was just dotted with all these specks of light. It was extraordinary, the immensity of creation, and thus to talk about the Lord of the elements, the Lord of the starry sky. That all makes sense in terms of relating God to those experiences. There's time among the Celts, Christian Celts, ancient Celts. The fullness of time is cyclical. The valuing of daily routine, in the sense that, as it said, when God made time, he made plenty of it. Contrary, this timelessness, contrary to our own society, there is a sense then among them that it's kind of like with Mexico and mañana. Try not to get so bent out of shape with the things we have to do, but live in the moment. Again, Buddhists have this sense of mindfulness. You live in the moment, not the past with regret or the future with anxiety, but in the moment with its beauty and its evocative holiness. This Celtic spirituality is a love of learning. The Druids and Druidesses told their stories, but also the monasteries, Celtic monasteries, became education for centers for Europeans on the continent. There was a sense, and rightly said, that Europeans would go to Ireland because the education was free in these monasteries. That was a real draw. They valued the classical tradition. They kept that alive, as I mentioned earlier. The illuminated manuscripts, the Book of Kells, everyone must go to Trinity College and see that. And every day they turn a page, and sometimes it's not all that attractive. The last time I was there, though, it was a mystical experience again, because, oh my God, then it was all there, these illuminations. What's also found in the Book of Kells is so many animal pictures, which again shows that valuing and relationship to animals. There's a love of solitude. I mean, this is again contemporary for many of us. It's like we're bombarded with, social media, and we're bombarded with meetings that we have to go to, unless you're retired now. I hope you can look forward to that. But there's a real love of solitude, and their heroes, in fact, the Christian Celts, their heroes were, and they often appear on the high crosses, the desert fathers and mothers. They had a name that they took from the desert of Dysart. Dysart is a desert. And many of their early Celtic saints have that side to them of wanting to be in solitude and wanting to be in cells. My home I've named Dysart O'Day. It was the first place I ever visited in Ireland that was associated with this element of solitude. And my home, there's a lot of people in it too at times, and my dog, but it's a quiet place. I look forward to that, especially when I'm trying to think and to write. There's an integration of the masculine and the feminine that you find. In the early Celtic churches, before Rome really got hold of these places, that women were in charge. There were double monasteries where women were abbesses, they one's in charge, and it was made up of both women and men. I mean, it wasn't free love. It was very much women's monastery conjoined with the male, but the abbess was in charge. It's fantastic. I mean, there's stories that I really appreciate that Bridget was a bishop, at one time. And that's St. Ida was a confessor. So there's a lot of these, again, the Roman roles that they kept to the men. Among the early Celtic churches, they were women included in leadership as well. It's a wonderful thing that my Catholic Church needs to have more of. The friendship between the saints is beautiful. I mentioned before the appreciation of storytelling, the high crosses. You have to see the high crosses when you go to these different Celtic lands. They tell stories. There's different carvings. Some of them carvings, I said, are the desert fathers and mothers, but also the Celtic heroes, the Celtic saints. The bards in terms of storytellers. The Celts have a long tradition, literary tradition, of appreciating knowledge, of writing stories, of poetry. The Celts are so much valued, their traditions in that regard. I mentioned the appreciation of soul making and soul friends. I mentioned the yearning to explore, the wanderlust that led not only to seeking out new lands, but for Christians seeking out some of the holy places on the continent and even going to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. The love of the marginalized, the poor, the neglected. I mean, they took Jesus' words seriously, the Good Samaritan. But these are our brothers and sisters. It's one of this in our own society that I find so abhorrent on how immigrants are being treated today. The sense of humor. There was Irish, and the Celts had a sense that you either laugh or you cry a lot. And sometimes the laughter helps us get through the tears. Finally, there's this wonderful thing about, as I've just written about, is this love of animals, that kinship. The valuing of animals as in many ways co-equal. And even, I mean, the stories say that even the Celts realized that, damn it, some of those animals are a lot smarter than me and have much to teach us. And that's the sense I have too with my own dogs that I've had over time and my cat that made me not only a dog person, but there's a sense of, oh my God, of what my animals have taught me and have really opened me up to a much wider world of animal suffering. I taught animal theology in my later years at St. Kate's, and it was theology concerned with the suffering of animals. And there's so much suffering today in our own world, and wars, and so many creatures being affected by that. But my conviction is that they have much to teach us. And I wanted to relate some of this animal stories, is that when I first wrote the book, Wisdom of the Celtic Saints, there was a lot of stories of the Celtic saints with animals, but it wasn't focused on that. But what it really showed me was how much the Celtic saints protected animals from the hunters and from all sorts of abuses. Melengith, for example, was protecting rabbits and all of these different creatures, all these different saints that were protecting creatures. But when I turned it around, I gave this talk at Oxford on Celtic saints and animals. It's really the origin of my book. But when I turned it around and asked the question, well, what were the animals doing for the saints? Oh my God, that opened up a whole new realm. It's intriguing, isn't it? What are questions, where they can lead us? And what I discovered was all these stories. Just briefly, though, the reciprocity of animals with the saints and vice versa. Here in Clonmacnoise had a fox that acted as a mail carrier between himself and another monk. Kieran of Sagir had his monastery built with the help of a wild boar, a wolf, a badger, a fox, a deer, all of whom stayed once the monastery was built as if they had been monks. And I deal a lot with today in different monasteries, different religious orders, how lay people are becoming associated with them as consociates, as oblates. There's a lot of different terms. When I was over in China, I was at the different temples, Buddhist temples, and I noticed at one gigantic temple, the monks were in meditation or praying or pounding on drums, whatever. And there was this group on the other side of, it looked like lay people. And I asked the guide, who are they? Well, he said, these are people, lay people that associate with the Buddhist tradition. And I thought, well, that's exactly what's happening in so many parts of Europe, in the United States today, with religious communities becoming older and older, and lay people becoming more appreciative of the traditions that they offer. This was Kinnear and his animal oblates. There's Coleman. He despised material things, it said, but he had a rooster, a mouse, and a fly as part of his community, his daily life and community. The rooster acted as an alarm clock. Now, if you've ever been on farms, or for me, with the first morning I woke up in Jerusalem, there was this rooster crowing. Wow, you can't get away from it. It brings me back to the passion of Jesus when he had foretold that Peter would deny him 3 times. And that after the 3rd time Peter did, he heard the rooster crow. But in the story, the rooster is the alarm clock. The mouse nibbled at his clothes to wake him for divine office. Actually, I wouldn't encourage that, wanting to have a mouse in your house. But the fly is something like a marker. When he was reading, Coleman was reading, and had to leave to do something else, the fly would sit down upon the line at which the line he left, so that when he came back, he could know where to start. These are helpful animals and creatures. Cuthbert, if you know Cuthbert, is a saint you should know. I love him tremendously. He was said to pray in the ocean and at night, and then come out of the coldness, and these otters would come to him and warm his feet. Something I'm sure he really needed. St. Cuthbert is buried in the same cathedral of Durham in northern England as Bede, the great person, that the English-speaking historian, as he said, but also told us so many of these stories of the saints. And Brendan was among them. Cuthbert. And then Brendan the whale. The whale provided Brendan solace when he was lost, that his boat could rest upon. It was an important aspect of his survival on his voyages. I'd like to close my own presentation with a book, a reading from my own book. Not that I'm promoting, of course, but well, I am. My books can be found on Amazon.com, or sometimes you go into the bookstores and can ask for them. But I did my book on the Celtic Saints and animals, spiritual kinship. It says, history shows and these stories revealed that the ancient Celts had a high regard for animals as teachers and guides, healers and soul friends. They considered animals in many ways equal to humanity, and in some ways superior in their awareness and sensitivities. The Celtic saints reflected that awareness in their lives and their spirituality. their sense of kinship with all of creation, their awareness of the reciprocity and friendship that we can have with our fellow creatures can inspire us to create modern day lifestyles built around concern with the creatures that share our world. The 9th century anonymous author of Pangar Bán, a book about a cleric's cat that was mentioned as really his inspiration for the poem. The poem concludes with this stanza: "Practice every day has made Pangar perfect in his trade. I get wisdom day and night." This is the monk writing. "I get wisdom day and night, turning darkness into night, into light. And so may each of us, with the help of our animal teachers and guides, turn darkness into light, learning and sharing wisdom with all our fellow creatures." So there we go. Elizabeth, would you like to come in?
I'm in. That was great. Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. I'm from Kerry, we were saying at the start, so my cousins are from Dingle, so I'm well familiar with Galler's Oratory down there. It's beautiful, and there's a little cemetery and churchyard near my home called Dyshirt, so I was struck by the parallels. And as one of our members said, thank you so much for sharing your story about your friend who passed away. I have had several friends, unfortunately, who died, some when we were quite young, and my grandmother last year. And I have to say, I have dreamed about every single one of them. So it's a great talking point when Irish people get together, how many dreams or sightings they've had. Yeah.
So it's much more typical of Irish or the Celts than perhaps, I don't know, when we get older, we do start to talk about those types of experiences, whereas I think maybe we're younger, we might be a little apprehensive of being considered wacko.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point too about being raised, I suppose in an Irish and Catholic tradition at home in Ireland, we were never really afraid of death. Like, you are brought up with it as part of, life. And I sometimes think that's a big difference between the American culture and the Irish culture. Ireland is such an old, as of course is America, but we're surrounded, by empty houses where people left because of the Great Hunger. Or in my hometown, there's a mass burial grave with about 4,000 or 5,000 people in there. And so, my grandfather died when I was 5. My father's father had died when he was 14. So you grew up even hearing about these mythical grandfathers, And I think that is probably a much healthier way to go through life, in one way, like, not that you're depressed or that, death is inevitable, but that, there is a kind of a respect, I suppose, given to older people, the wisdom. We're not chasing eternal youth, and what that does in terms of consumerism and all of that. Do you want to speak a little bit about that, and then we'll get into the questions from the audience?
Well, I again, as I've aged and reached a certain age, I turned 80 in January 1st, and
congratulations! Oh, a very good birthday! Happy, the new year and everything.
Well, I know. I mean, it was fun when I had the party, but so many people came hungover.
Yeah.
But no, one becomes more aware of one's vulnerability, fragility in life, etc. But I know my mother-in-law would talk about when she was a young girl, she would go with her mother and grandmother to the cemetery. It was like every Sunday. Probably not in Minnesota. It wouldn't have been during the winter, I wouldn't think. But anyway, there was this ritual, this real sense of being related to the dead, to those who have gone before us, and valuing that, and through the stories being able to learn the different qualities that they still would offer us. I went on pilgrimage. As I said, I've made many, and I've taken many people on pilgrimages, but I went with my mother. This was a few years ago, to southern Minnesota, where my Irish and German ancestors were buried. And the Irish had their own town, see, and the graveyard, and then the Germans another part. My grandmother, when she married my grandfather, who was German, my grandmother Irish, there was a big scandal, that you're bringing those two groups together as
Mixed marriage.
Exactly. But I mean, again, with my mother, I heard all these stories that I hadn't heard before, or maybe I hadn't remembered. But she could, introducing me to all these different people. And that's a tremendous gift, I think, of the Irish. The wakes, Irish wakes, they can sometimes be kind of out of control. But again, there's a real sense of honoring the dead, remembering the dead, and really making it into a joyous event in the midst of sorrow with shared food and all of that. So this is something that I think in our own society is very much of a youth culture, and it's very much of not wanting to show your age. I mean, I'm into that already, but it can be an aberration where we're still denying that, yes, we're aging and we will die, and it's good to prepare for that as well. I mentioned with the Soul Friend, it's somebody that helped the person who's going to transfer over into another dimension to help them through that passage. And that's, again, a tremendous gift of hospice.
Yeah. Actually, that book is used a lot. I think my friend died when we were 24. She had skin cancer, and she chose the readings for her funeral, even though she was kind of in denial right the way up until she died, and it was very inevitable for the last 6 months. She knew there was no hope. But she chose readings from Anam Cara, and she gave us all a copy of the book, and and so that it was interesting. And I have since done that with other people who were being bereaved. It's John O'Donoghue's book. You had just struck me too about something else I wanted to say, the similarity among the cultures. But yeah, I think the waking is amazing. And then, as you say, like those links with kind of India, and even our language, the Indian language. I was speaking to someone recently, Rita, actually from the center up there, and she was saying, we were talking about running a course maybe in the new year and about Indigenous and kind of ancient cultures and language. And some of you will know Mancon Megan. I think he actually went to the Junction when he was out. He certainly appeared in Albany when I was there. And he studies the Irish language, but so much of the Irish language has already been lost. And he said in the old days, we had a word to describe the moo that a cow makes when she's bereft of her calf. And we just say moo, the cow mooed, but there was different words in the Irish language to talk about the experience of the animal. And so he was talking about like how closely connected we must have been at one time with the land. And then he talks about, the implications that all of this industrial farming is going to, when we don't even objectify the cows or the sheep or the chickens, and I mean, I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, I'm kind of okay with the fact that there's a food chain, but you worry about that disconnect, between us and nature and animals. And so it's interesting that your work is also looking at this,
Yeah, well, what you mentioned, I had no idea that there's different words for moo, but what came to me immediately was this thing on I forget where, but it was how these farmers are separating the calves from the mothers so that they can, eventually kill the calves.
And get the milk from the mom.
But there was this horrible scene of her, the mother, having been the child, the calf being taken away, going after them and mooing and mooing and mooing, and this heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm into animals because they are so much subject, many of them, China and other places where they kill dogs and eat them, but they like to torture them first because they think the meat is better tasting.
Yeah.
I mean, all of
I
this,
know that. Yeah. Well, so we do have a lot of questions from the audience, which is good. So I'll just go straight into Richard asked very early on, and I hope you can remember what you were talking about. He said, will you please expand on your passing reference to the Celts and the Camino de Santiago? I wonder were the Celts, I suppose it's that the Celts were also kind of in that region, or it wasn't necessarily Irish Celts going over there. Yeah.
No, it was the Celts were.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, again, there's similarities of Land's End outside of Santiago. There's a Land's End I've been at, and then there's one in Brittany, and then etc. So it's these beautiful places of nature and the power of nature. But in Santiago, especially, those were Celts, and the food and that region, the food and other art, etc., is very much connected with that tradition.
Huh. Actually, there's a fantastic film. I presume it's widely available online now. It's an Irish film called The Camino Voyage, and it traces five men. I guess most of them are from Dingle down in Kerry, but they go in a currach across to France and from there to Spain, and they, make their way to the Camino. It's a beautiful movie and like, two or three of the men are certainly up there in age. Begley was a famous musician. He was one of them, and there's a couple of people. So I think you and the audience would like that.
So is this a recent movie?
2018, I think. Yeah, it's been out a while, so you can see it online.
And what's it called?
The Camino Voyage. I showed it at a film club back in the day. Mm-hmm.
I'll look for it.
Yeah, good. So then Claire said, thank you for sharing the beautiful story of your friend coming to visit you in your dreams. Do you have any resource recommendations for dream interpretation from a Celtic spiritual lens?
I don't. I mean, I studied dreams, and I mean, my last book, possibly my last book, the one I'm starting now, is on dreams and visions.
Oh, good. Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I'm just blank there in terms of writings from a Celtic perspective on dreams. Does anybody know anything like that? Does she? Oh, she's asking the question.
No, she's asking, yeah. I wonder, did what's his name that wrote Anam Cara write anything about that, or John O'Donoghue? Is that him?
I don't recall. John and I were friends, and when I was here at St. Kate's, we had some Celtic conferences, and we brought John over. But I was also a friend of some people who knew John, and I told them, I said, I knew John was writing on the Anam Cara, and I was writing on the Anam Cara. I said, damn it, I don't really like this guy, when I've heard of him. So then he came to town, to Minneapolis, signing books. I got in line, I introduced myself, and John said, oh, I've heard of you, and you're not going to hurt me now, are you? But we became great friends, and
that's good.
Last time he was in town, I was teaching, and we wanted to get together, and we didn't. And then he died, and I took my son, Daniel Patrick, over to find that grave. And it was John's grave was a pilgrimage site. So many people were coming and leaving mementos.
Yeah, absolutely, I'd believe it.
Go ahead.
What I was going to say, we can check, Claire and I somehow will put a link, maybe when we do this video and put it up on our YouTube page, we'll be able to link to like a book list. I'll make a note of that. Then Carol asked.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Then Carol asked, are there references to the earliest Christianity before Rome's dominance, before original sin? Are there references to the earliest Christianity before Rome's dominance and before original sin? I wonder, Carol, if you're talking about in the Celtic stuff that we knew or in the Irish church pre-Romanization. I think that's kind of what you were talking about when he asked the question. How the Catholic Church in Ireland became Romanized as such, even though before that it had been not so.
Right. Well, again, the whole development of the church. I'm going to give a talk on this in the near future now, but it's kind of like so much of our history of Christianity, Roman Catholicism, has been written by the conquerors, the ones
Mhm.
who won. And thus,
Mhm.
women's gifts and all of this was just, wasn't even considered.
Yeah.
And that's something that, of course, today, thank God, there's many people questioning that, many women theologians that are writing about it, etc.
Mhm.
But the original Christianity was groups of people meeting together and remembering Jesus and sharing bread together, and that was before they went to Rome, and then it became Romanized as the city itself was invaded by different barbarians. And increasingly, the bishop of Rome was the protector, and thus then he becomes the ruler of Rome, and then we have the
Mhm.
whole development of the papacy. But again, this Celtic Christians were immersed in their own culture and their own times, and thus what they learned as Christianity came to them was an adaptation to their own culture and their
Mhm.
refer, references to God, etc. I mean,
Yeah.
this early church was wonderful. It's one of the reasons why I'm so in love with it is that women were confessors, women were leaders, spiritual leaders. They were very much, this was one of the things, I think it's St. Augustine, not of Hippo, but the one who was Pope when he sent the missionaries to Ireland and heard about the women being in charge. He said, one of the first things we must eliminate that. And
Mm.
I find that so offensive. But this whole fear of women and their gifts and all that became much more and more established.
Yeah.
And thank God we're questioning that.
Well, in some in some areas and in some parts, but yeah, it's. I mean, when you were talking about the phallic kind of idolatry, or at
Yeah.
home, we have the Sheila na gigs too at home in Ireland. Quite
Yeah.
a few of those kind of symbols of women fertility, and
Yeah.
sometimes even over church doors. So,
Well, I think
and I mean.
there's one in St. Bridget's Church in Kildare.
Yeah, there is, and there's a couple down in Kerry, like it in various and other parts of the country. But it's interesting too that I think Ireland is a really good example actually of where you can see the overlay of like the hierarchy and the authority because in order to spread the word, they had to take hostage like the sites of all of these holy wells that we have, and it's very intriguing to me that there were sites all over the country that had to be Catholicized that had previously just been,
Oh, yeah.
maybe pagan or whatever. And like again, that nature link, So I think recently there was a very famous, maybe a well that was kind of known for centuries, that it had a cure for people who had, as we say in Ireland, a problem with their nerves or some kind of mental health, issues. And it turns out when the science caught up with the folklore, there's a ton of lithium in the water naturally, so like it actually is medicinal as opposed to miraculous, but yeah, but they knew what they
Well,
were
no.
doing.
Well, there's the whole things of Christianity baptizing the
Yeah,
ancient wells and the ancient
yeah.
places. I was in Mexico with my wife, and we went to Guadalupe, Our Lady of
Mm,
Guadalupe. That's a
yeah.
big, big, beautiful church, etc. But I with her started walking towards it, and I freaking, I felt energy. I felt energy, and I wasn't looking for it. Some of
Mhm.
these experiences we're not looking for, but they kind of hit us in the face. But then
Yeah.
I read where that church was really at a sacred feminine site, you know.
Mm.
So there's continuity and all that, and I try to express that in terms of uh, Christianity, spirituality today. It's very much related to the ancient Celts and all.
Yeah, and especially the pressure that we're putting our environment under, and now the whole AI thing, we won't even get into it, but I think there's a need in a way to go backwards and inwards, and so all of that earlier Celtic spirituality kind of answered those needs.
Right.
So Constance has asked, and same thing, I presume, it's a bit unfair to ask you, but all of your books we can recommend. But she wanted to know, if I want to learn more about Celtic spirituality, what is the number one book you would recommend for me to get started? And if you could share one male author and one female author, but obviously, your books are there.
Well, there's John O'Donohue.
Or John, yeah.
I mean, I'm reading women throughout, but one in particular, in terms of Celtic spirituality, I'm sorry I don't have that information. There's nothing that, it may be part of my age too. I said, when you get to my age, if you don't remember, just put it aside and then it'll come eventually, we hope.
Yeah.
But
I think sometimes too, a lot of the Celtic books, I mean, I don't know if you feel this as an academic, I worry sometimes that, people are reading kind of drivel, like, or not proper information,
Sure.
Yeah, and so that can be a problem. I know there's a Joyce, somebody, I forget her last name, she was a scholar of like the early feminine sacred. So she's done a lot of work, for instance, on Mary Magdalene.
Right.
And there's a book called The Woman with the Alabaster Jar, which was amazing about that. And Sue Monk Kidd also wrote a brilliant book about her own personal journey. I think she was raised Baptist or something in the South. And that book is called The Dance of the Dissident Daughter. And I think like they're beautiful books about wrestling, with organized religion and looking for the divine feminine. Again, we'll put this list together and we'll be able to offer it to you on the website. We have a few more to go through. Somebody said about the thin places. Would you categorize your experiences mentioned about your friend and grandfather as thin places experiences? Now, I guess thin places means something very specific in this instance.
Yeah, I wouldn't, those are more kind of, without being too strange, kind of mystical experiences. But thin place itself as a designation is a geographical area.
Okay.
Associated with those experiences. I told you the one nun from Oxford who had been raised in one of these islands. I forget which one. But anyway, she introduced me to the term, and she associated it with something of this this encounter with the past living in front of you, being there. And I suppose with my grandfather, I didn't see him, but I certainly became aware of him unconsciously. I mean, it just came out of me, Grandpa, what are you doing here? But a thin place in itself is a designation of sacred places. And
right, like the fairy forts at home. Some people won't go into them. And even when I was growing up, like there were kind of rules around how you engaged. We grew up believing you could go in there, but you couldn't take anything. So you couldn't pick a flower, you couldn't disturb anything, and you shouldn't leave anything. But they were more associated with fairies, I suppose, than with, but what are the fairies like? So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And now then Richard, let me look at this. He says, I'm wondering if there's an Irish liberation theology. I'm a graduate of the Mary Knowles School of Theology, which was known for Latin American liberation theology, and I studied Black liberation theology at Howard Divinity. Those theologies have much to say to two theologies that have been used to oppress people. And certainly the Irish Catholic Church oppressed folk, which makes an Irish liberation theology so needed and so powerful. And Celtic spirituality would be a huge part of that. He says maybe the pre-Roman Christians were Irish liberation theologians, especially the empowerment of women in the lifting up of the animal kingdom and nature. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. But no, I just picked up a book that's written by an Irish person, theologian, talking about social justice and that tradition in Irish Christianity. I don't have the name handy, but there's more being written about that, I think, from native theologians.
Yeah. Well, I think Ireland is a very interesting case. Like I'll be 49 in November, so I grew up really right before the scandals, came out. I mean, the Magdalene homes, for instance, were still open, until I think they were still taking inmates in the 80s, and then I believe the last one closed in about 97 or 98, and so I grew up in a very, I would say, like social justice driven church. I mean, the scandals came out, and I suppose when they came out, none of us were shocked really, and that was more the pity of it. I think that's why the backlash has been so big, was because, you know,
Yeah.
my mother and grandmother and men, you know, too, this had been going on for generations. But the thing I was going to say about that in Ireland, I think it's very difficult to separate the church from the state there. You know, we had only become independent in 1921. And unfortunately, like, the state schools are run by the church, you know, a lot of the hospitals were. And so I don't instinctively kind of blame Rome or the institution as much as I do the partnering in Ireland of, you know, a state that kind of let the church take over, as well as, you know, maybe there's something to do with a chip on our shoulder, you know, about being independent and you couldn't admit we were doing things wrong. There certainly is kind of a, you know, a middle class respectability about the whole thing too, that I think gets bound up, you know, because the church was very, very powerful and authoritative in Ireland
Well, what,
right through the 70s, you know.
well, what is there's a recent movie, there's an Irish actor, male actor, who got some sort of Academy award, but he's in an institution like that and becomes aware of
Yeah. Small
cruelty.
things like these, I think it must be.
Is
It
that
was
it?
a short story written by Claire Keegan. Yeah. He
I know,
he
but it's
flees a girl from one of the
but it's
convents.
a movie. It's a movie now.
Yeah.
I have to go back
Cillian
and
Murphy was the guy who was in it. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
fantastic.
That was great. I mean, that movie was set in 1985, and I have to say, you know, I was alive in 1985. I thought they made Ireland look like it was 1975. You know, I don't remember it being that dark and that poor kind of, you know, but I thought it was a very powerful movie.
All right.
So that's a whole big thing. Maeve wants to know, what are the key similarities and values of Celtic paganism that remained present through the spiritual transition into Celtic Christianity? Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Okay, so the key similarities and values of Celtic paganism, which remained present.
Right. Well, again, for me, it's their appreciation of nature, being close to nature. Uh, I mean, the Irish nature poets that came out of that period in Middle Ages, it's all these poetry. I examined some of it in this book, but there's that link, appreciation of nature that the Irish monks eventually, hermits eventually adapted. There's this tremendous sense of the soul friend, the spiritual help a person can give, that came out of the ancient Celts and their appreciation of that tradition. There's the storytelling and the bards and all that. There's all of those were values that were really passed on to Christianity. What else is there? There's just a lot of things that were incorporated into a spirituality, kind of a combination of both. And again, there were things that they rejected, Christians rejected. The bloodshed, certainly there were enough people that spoke out against the harm that's done, etc. There was certain human sacrifice. That was one that, I mean, you still find it in the bog people, you know, you find, and that was, thank God, rejected by the Christians. You know, that's not something you want to continue.
Yeah.
So there were, but again, the appreciation of family, kinship ties, these are all going back to the ancient tribal.
And I suppose we shouldn't kind of lionize these people either. Like, you know, we talk a lot about Brehon society. You know, the Irish owned slaves, for instance, among their own people. Like, it was a very hierarchical society. And
Oh,
even
yeah.
though we often say it was a matriarchal society, you know, only women of a certain class, you know, had rights. And you know, I think the burden on them to prove for divorce was much higher than for a man, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, nobody is without fault, but I think they've just found more, I think they said there were Bronze Age burials in the west of Ireland somewhere. I just saw it on my Instagram, so I don't know if it was a couple of months ago, you know, or recently, but they are still finding out more about these things. And then one of our members, attendees, has said, Have you read books by John Philip Newell or Sharon Blackie? Both would be excellent for the reading list. In particular, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul by Newell or Woman Rose Rooted by Blackie. Oh, that's great. You can add those to
I
the list.
I don't know Blackie, but Noel,
Oh.
we had him at the Wisdom Center at St. Kate's as a speaker there. I got to know
Oh.
him then, and I'm very familiar with his works, but I'm sorry I'm deficient in the other person's writings.
Excuse me. Yeah, I haven't read it either, but this is a little bit outside of my own wheelhouse. I just looked up The Woman with the Alabaster Jar, and it was written by a woman called Margaret Starbird. So I don't know who the Joyce person I'm talking about is, but I went through a phase probably about 10 years ago, and I collected a lot of those books because I was intrigued by, and you mentioned it earlier on too, like we know that Salome and Mary paid for Jesus's ministry, and even the fact that he appeared to the women first, and
Yeah,
yet they're totally sidelined, and then later on Paul says, don't speak in church, women. And so and when I read Sue Monk Kidd's book, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, she talks about, it was all them, and no us. And, she just felt very excluded as a woman.
oh yeah,
And she wrote another fabulous book with her daughter called Traveling with Pomegranate Seeds. And she goes to various Celtic, French and Spanish and I don't think she makes it to Ireland, but she may go to Scotland. And she does some of those sites, and she does Greek, ancient Greece. And so this whole idea of Hera, the goddess of the hearth, and the pre kind of Christian idea of the maid and the mother and the crone, it's all very fascinating. So there are loads of people doing it. I just
yeah.
haven't read enough about it. That person said that Blackie is also a psychologist who does extensive work with Celtic myths and Jungian dream work. So that might be a good.
What's
um
does she give a title of a book?
No. Oh, yeah, sorry. She did give one. Let me just look it up again. It's down at the bottom. Uh, no, sorry, Woman Rose Rooted.
Say that again.
Woman Rose Rooted. Like the rose tree, and then rooted.
Oh, that,
Rooted.
that's the title.
Yeah,
I,
of the book by Blackie.
my first granddaughter is named Rose, so
Oh, nice.
I
That's
will
great.
I will pursue this book.
Yeah, see, there's no
And
coincidences.
it's Blackie. It's Blacke. Is that
Blackie. She has spelled it here. Oh, sorry, she's just retyped it. I think it might be If Women Rose Rooted. So If Women Rose Rooted.
okay?
That's great.
All right.
Oh, Rose. Yeah, as in like grew up rooted. I love that. Okay. Mhm. So we have a couple of courses coming up Are you teaching in the fall, Ed, here at
Yeah,
the Junction? Yeah. What are you teaching?
I forget the title,
Oh,
but it's taking apart, this overview that I've given. It's concentrating on, well, the soul friend, upon the nature mystics, the animal world. That's
oh, good.
was from
Okay, I'll find it here. Yeah, so there still is obviously time, to register for that. Go back. I'm just looking for the overall course because I won't find it otherwise. Um, and then I'm teaching, funnily enough, on women in 20th century Ireland, and we're going to use a play called Eclipsed. So it'll be, I call it text in context. It's going to talk about how, the law and society and history kind of sets women up one way in Ireland, and yet, we know that there are these social issues, in particular, the Magdalene home. So that play, Eclipsed, was written by a woman who had been a nun and sort of lost her vocation after working in one of these convents. It's quite sad. I'm just looking for where here you are, Friendship in Celtic Lands. So your classes are on Wednesday nights. They're in
yeah.
person, so those of you in Minneapolis are lucky. 7 o'clock on Wednesdays, starting October 8th. And so that will be, you guys can go there. And then, oh, mine still isn't on the website. Excellent. We'll have to get that up there tomorrow.
Yes.
But mine is not starting until November, so there's time. But I'll speak to Carolyn and try and get it added to the
Are you
website.
are you doing it on Zoom then? On
Yeah,
Zoom?
mine will be Zoom. and it's only like 4 sessions, I think. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
think mine's only 5, but, well, next time you come here,
yeah,
let's get together.
I would love that. Yeah, that would be great. It would. Well, and I think tonight, I mean, our news feed is so overrun. I'm sure all of you are feeling the same. And, there's a lot of different issues. And I was speaking to somebody at the weekend about, how the language around us at the moment is so divisive. And we're just and, social media doesn't help. Like we're being more and more siloed, and you only see confirmation bias kind of stuff coming into your feed, and so I think these kinds of talks are beautiful. And if we can remember to ground ourselves in the kind of the interior, almost instinctive knowing that I think true spirituality is, we'll be a lot better off. But we'll get that reading list together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or comments before we close up? No, I'll just give them a few seconds, but I think that was very helpful, Ed, and hopefully your course, as I say, you have still plenty of time because it doesn't start until the 8th of October, and then it will be in person. And my own starts very early November because it will be finished before Thanksgiving. So we'll both of those are options, and loads more. Check out the page.
Yeah.
But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm sure they'll be back in person. Classes have already started. Some of these, Irish language ones and a lot of the music ones. Their Celtic yoga is back already. So just keep an eye on our website and the classes, the fall schedule, and we'll have a very full January through June schedule as well coming up soon. That'll be available around Thanksgiving.
Well, I wanted to thank you, Elizabeth, for your ability to get us through it all and the conversations you and I could have. That was great. And thank you to all the people out there whom I can't see, but thank you for watching.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And one of the attendees said, thank you, very insightful. Yeah, it's difficult when you're doing this because we can't see the audience, but so I said to him, it's like talking into the void, but we know someone is listening.
We hope.
Good. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone. And as I say, keep an eye on the website, and you're welcome. Another one. Thank you for presenting. That's great, guys. We're delighted to do it. And keep an eye out for more. I do think the online stuff is great because we can have a kind of a broader conversation with people from outside of our own milieu, but it's nice that your classes are in person. So that's good. All right, everyone, then good night. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining.